we're all recording now, so if you'd like to go ahead.
I'll kick off. Firstly, it's so lovely to say it again. Welcome to everybody to Coffee Buddies, which is terrific. We've said that many times over quite a few years, but recently I've not been saying that so much. And so because we've been going back to live events, but we can tell you about that later. But our goal is to inform, entertain and engage. So engagement is very much one of our things, getting people's voices heard. And we've had some terrific times together and we will continue to have terrific times. And thanks to Patrick for the Biotech Gate Festival, which we are honoured to drive in our little VW coffee van and meet you all. And we've been doing that for some years. One day we'll get a better van, won't we, Graham? But we're not for a while.
Once we can afford it.
Actually, with me and Graham, it's more like a motorcycle and sidecar and one cup. But on that note, we bring interesting people to catalyse our thinking. And today we've got Kaz, who I've known for some time, great guy. And Kaz, maybe you can tell us who you are, where you are and what you do, and start giving us a bit of some insights into things.
Hi, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Graham and Tony, for putting this together in Biotech Gate. So my name is Kassim Kolia. I'm VP of Business Development for Rentschler ATMP. We're based here in the UK, CDMO for gene therapy manufacturers, so based in the Stevenage gene therapy hub here in the UK. So we've been involved in this space for over 10 years. Prior to me joining Rentschler ATMP, I was with a company called Vector, which was known as Advanced Therapies, where they had a couple of gene therapy where they took to phase 3. So they were the kind of pioneers in gene therapy back in the day. So I've been in this space for 10 years now, so kind of seen the whole gene therapy arena explode.
Which I think is really interesting and also really exciting. And I mean, you've got a few slides that you're going to show to us. So do you want to just bring up, we've got, I think, 3 or 4 slides that you can
that's right.
put up.
Sorry. Let me get the right screen.
Lovely. So, I mean, gene and cell therapy or cell and gene therapy, massively exciting arena, tremendous opportunity. But your title is Finding Our Way to a Clear Development Path, which I think is something which really is close to my heart, because it's like, how can you get there with cost, quality and time, which I think is what we're all about. So maybe you just give us some thoughts, Kaz.
So, I mean, during my experience working, I've worked with kind of 2 products that's got approved. During those 2 experiences, as well as working with other gene therapy companies developing products, there's a lot of hurdles to overcome, and kind of in my experience, the kind of product dictates the process rather than the process dictating what the product should be. And and again, there's lots of hurdles to overcome and kind of risk mitigation to kind of surpass all those elements.
And your first slide, which you're going to bring up, is this explosion of the ecosystem.
Yeah, I'll say that's
that's a little bit on you. But if we go to this one, which is this, I mean, this is a meteoric explosion, isn't it? If you
yes. So I was going to say this data is current from November last year. Probably some of you have seen it on LinkedIn. But to date, as you're aware, there's 27 approved cell and gene therapy products, 10 approvals between the US and Europe. And as you can see, the pipeline for preclinical and phase 1, there's a huge amount of companies there touching kind of rare and orphan diseases, as well as ophthalmology, neurology, other types of diseases which have not been touched upon previously. So in my experience, 10 years ago, there was only a handful of kind of gene therapy companies in this space. And now you've seen, as technology has evolved and innovation has evolved, and the growth of the kind of gene therapy community. I think it's 20 to 25% year upon year. You've seen this kind of nice illustration of the companies here today.
I mean, this explosion is going to cause, in a systemic way, huge amount of money is required here, huge amount of money. Also, who's the buyers, who's the payers, and what the pricing is. But the sort of, and of course what the differentiation is. But if you look at sort of pathways of development and, how people use these huge amounts of money, you've got some thoughts really on these pathways of development, haven't you?
Yes, that's correct. In my experience, kind of the pathways of development in terms of manufacturing has developed a long way, but again, I think there's still a long way to go in terms of the equipment to manufacture these gene therapies, particularly AAV, and particularly the processes involved, and then also the kind of reagents involved as well. So there's, different kind of parameters and paths that companies can take, and navigating them is hugely expensive, especially in the initial stages of process development.
Yeah, your next slide then starts to dissect the process a little bit, or it shows the complexity of the process.
Yeah, so this is a illustration of the web. Please bear with me if I've not got all the kind of lines of communication correct, but it kind of indicates the intricate web, as some of you know, between if you are contracting out to a CDMO, a CRO, the animal house, the testing house, the subcontracting testing, and kind of all the elements that is involved, from starting from scratch, from preclinical, going up to clinical in phase 1, from getting the process right, the reagents, the cell line, the technology, and most importantly, the analytical development behind all that, and then also formulation and fill finish and delivery of the drug as well. So this is a kind of complex web that I tried to put together to illustrate that. Yeah,
and if you break that down a little.
So what we've done here is kind of broken that down into kind of discovery, preclinical development, and clinical development. Where Rentschler comes in is kind of in the preclinical development and the clinical development. So naturally, at the start, if you're an academic or a biotech company, you would have your target validated, the disease mechanism, the modes of action confirmed, the lead molecule, gene therapy, the gene of interest, identified, and your clinical candidates selected. And then at the kind of bench level, if you're starting like academia, you have the kind of process to develop that, the research process and research grade material to kind of verify the targets at that stage. And then as you move from that into manufacturing, where Rentschler would come in, or any other CDMO, is manufacturing a drug source process. So again, optimizing the yield and quality, ensuring the robustness of the process, which heavily affects your timeline and cost of goods, and then the quality target profile of the product defined. The analytical methods are also established as well. In the early days of my experience, you would have to set the pathway up for the regulatory authorities because they weren't familiar in this area 6, 7, 8 years ago. So all these kind of processes and parameters, you would have to define that into the regulatory authorities. Formulation has to be defined as well, and I think a lot of companies need to put emphasis in this area as well. And I don't think people.
Do you think people could seriously reduce costs if they did more upfront work in their discovery times?
Yeah, I agree, Tony. As you know, with a biotech company, the kind of purse strings is very tight, and people want to get to the concept preclinical, show safety and efficacy quite quickly, and kind of jump some of the, miss some of the kind of feasibility studies or formulation, which needs to be investigated a lot more, which can affect bite you further down the line, as you well know, at phase 1 or phase 2, if you've not got those premises set in. Or
a terrible vicious circle, isn't it? I mean, we started this afternoon with Tom saying that there's the funding issue in Europe, really, but it really goes back to the same thing, that if you can't afford to do the prep work in the early phases, you then have to ask for so much more money later. So it goes back into this vicious circle, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And in my experience, you get clients that come in saying, I want this by this quick, up to phase 1 by this date, and then not much effort or kind of money's put down to develop the kind of early stage. And I think nowadays we've seen a lot more emphasis put in towards this area, whereas before it was kind of not looked upon, and it was just like, get me some material to do some in vivo tox and phase 1 in man. And I think that could be down to the complexity of AAVs, for example, and gene therapy, because you have different AAV serotypes, and even though you have a platform process, each of them behave differently in the upstream and downstream. You get different types of yield and the product profile as well. So I think, particularly in gene therapy, there's more emphasis laid upon manufacturing and doing feasibility studies to lock down the process or understand what's going on.
Yeah. Interesting. Now you've got another slide, the next slide.
Yes, this slide homes in on the kind of the development aspects and clinical aspects and the kind of typical gene therapy CMC challenges, and then the risk mitigation as well. So we've listed here the challenges at a high level from a process, the product point of view, and the testing, which is very important behind the process and the product. And again, as I mentioned before, working on some of the products, the product defines a process because it may be low yield in an adherent culture or suspension culture, and you have to revert back to the adherent culture. So from a process point of view, some AAVs typically show low productivity and yield, and some of the processes is lack of robustness and scalability. So how's that overcome?
And how does the disappointment, is it very common in your experience that the company has a perspective of time which, because you've got to go through so many loops, is just unattainable, and that they because it's like and it's loops, and they've just not predicted it because they've told the VCs and their board that everything is marvelous. So then you've got another year on the end. Do people go through those extreme time slippages, or are they quite modest?
In my experience in the early days, Tony, there was a lot of slippages because there's a lot of companies that coming into this space didn't understand the timelines and kind of adopted the MAB timeline, the monoclonal antibody timeline, or the kind of typical small molecule timeline. But now, a decade on in this area where there are a lot more experienced people, a lot more experienced manufacturing people in terms of upstream and downstream scientists. So, and people understand it a lot more. And I think the VCs also understand this area a lot more now in terms of the timeline and development and the manufacturing aspects associated with gene therapy in general. So yeah, I think that's, people are becoming more wise to it because there's a lot more experienced people in this space.
Yeah. Other points from this slide, Kaz?
Sorry, Tony.
Any other points from this slide?
Well, I've kind of highlighted the issues which could affect the process and products into testing, and then kind of the risk mitigation steps what you need to do from a process point of view. So there are high producing cell lines, proprietary cell lines, and stable cell lines out there which have been developed to kind of address the yields or the full to empty capsid ratios. As Rentschler ATMP, we have an optimized platform process where we've run a couple of AAVs through to understand what's going on in terms of yield. But different AAV behave differently. So optimizing the platform is key when you do a feasibility study. Viral clearance, viral safety is a critical aspect in production. Relies on principles of prevent, detect, and remove to ensure safety. So it's very critical that you have controlled raw and single-use materials and closed process step. And then, you know, in terms of the products, low efficacy and potency, the quality attributes and limited stability. So, you know, from that point of view, you need to have well-optimized payloads and capsids. So what we see now in the gene therapy space is very innovative companies coming out with capsid technology to increase the potency of the kind of AAV and the kind of quality of the products within the upstream manufacturing. Having integrated process analytics is key to any gene therapy manufacturing process. So to carry out IPCs and also understanding the drug substance and drug products. So we are seeing a lot of new companies in terms of developing new analytical machinery to analyze samples quicker, better, and have the kind of time frame of results within that time frame, so there's limited hold of your drug substance or drug products. Limited stability, again, optimizing your formulation and holding short hold times doing processing is very key here as well for the product aspect. And with all product testing is very key. With gene therapy, there's complex analytical testing required. High sampling demands limits the batch yield for the AAV batch, and an in vitro and in vivo potency assay is a challenge. And again, having automated and rapid methods, which we've developed in-house, addresses those kind of challenges. Sampling low volumes or having multi-parameter methods, again, will kind of address the kind of low yield, low volume at the end for your drug substance. And then in vitro potency, early establishment of validated methods is key for this aspect. So this is kind of some of the highlights of gene therapy which we experience at ATMP.
And if we bring the next slide up,
Yes,
I mean, this complexity. I mean, Rentschler has built this concept of a smaller unit, which you're calling biopharma, and that's designed particularly to help companies with this complexity. Is that what it is?
It is, yes. So from the kind of manufacturing aspect, I mean, Rentschler has been in the CDMO world for 50 years now, and they have a lot of experience in that, and they are a reputable company in terms of the scientific expertise, the transparency, and delivering on the right timeline. So kind of within this aspect, you know, we fit into here from the development aspect, process development, analytical, method validation, developing a robust process for the kind of gene therapy products. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Cass, for your overview, and we're bang on time.